My name's Tom Jennings, and this is the 24 Frames Cast. And in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the BBC film An Ungentlemanly Act, written and directed by Stuart Urban and released on British television on the 13th of June 1992. The film depicts the opening hours of the Falklands War, and instead of focusing on the victory that would eventually ensue from that conflict, it instead is about the inevitable loss of the Falkland Islands, where a tiny garrison of Royal Marines and the governor face an invasion that they cannot realistically stop, but feel honour bound to put up some kind of fight. They know that realistically they have no chance of stopping the invasion, but they are called the Royal Marines for a reason, and this is British territory, so come what may, they are going to put up a fight. So before we get on to the film itself, I think it's important to go back in time and talk about the context behind the Falklands War. In 1982, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Margaret Thatcher, was facing an uncertain future. Britain was experiencing economic difficulty and political unrest, and huge cuts in defence spending had reduced the capability of the British armed services, most notably the Navy. And the Falkland Islands were a distant and politically marginal issue in the public realm. They were literally out of sight and out of mind. And Britain, in many respects, had taken its eye off the ball, because the brutal truth of the matter was, in no way, shape or form did they expect the Argentines to ever invade the island, hence why there was only a token amount of soldiers stationed there at any given time, and certainly there were no air assets to complement this garrison. Meanwhile, in Argentina, the military had seized control, and under the dictatorship of Leopoldo Galtieri, Argentina was ruled by a military junta which was facing economic collapse and growing civil unrest. And in order to curry favour with the populace, the ruling junta decided it was time to retake the Falklands, or the Malvinas as they are known as in Argentina, to curry favour with the population and try and extend their stay in power. The invasion was really a distraction from the woes of Argentina. But with the islands relatively undefended, it would be a fairly easy military operation for Argentina to undertake, and they also didn't expect the British to send a task force. Indeed, they had legitimate historical claims to the island, which were taken by the British in 1833, and simply assumed that Britain would leave the islands to the Argentinians, who could then claim a huge victory. Now, An Ungentlemanly Act is a film about the British Empire, and I really do enjoy these films. There's some brilliant examples over the years, and I think my kind of love of this cinema came from my university lecturer, Dr. Sheldon Hall, who was a huge fan of cinema and empire. I did a unit in it when I was at university, and I did it around about sort of March, April period time, I seem to remember, and I think it's like imprinted something on me, because I always watch these types of films at this time of year, especially films like Zulu over the bank holiday. And Zulu is kind of a bit like An Ungentlemanly Act. It focuses on a small British force defending against overwhelming odds, and I would include films like The Four Feathers, which incorporate kind of imperial honour and duty, and The Man Who Would Be King, about adventure and ambition. And all these films contain very similar themes that are echoed in An Ungentlemanly Act. The idea of discipline and professionalism, duty to the crown. One of the images that you see so often in An Ungentlemanly Act is a picture of the Queen on the wall of Government House. And there is a moral courage in these distant places. People stand up for what they believe in. I used to work, and it's really interesting about the whole kind of thing about moral courage, because I worked with someone who fought in the Falklands War, and he said he was actually genuinely surprised that people in Britain, and quite a significant amount of people, were quite sceptical of the task force going back down to the islands to reclaim them. Because, as he put it, these were up to 2,000 British citizens who were effectively now being held hostage by an incredibly brutal regime. The Argentine junta was known for its ruthless dispatching of its critics, and he felt it was an absolute moral obligation for them to go down there. They didn't once think about the fact that that the island was so far away from Britain. It was just assumed that this was a moral crusade for all the very right reasons. And I think An Ungentlemanly Act fits into the tradition of the Empire film for a number of reasons, because it is essentially a film about a distant territory under British authority. It has a relatively small garrison defending it, and it has a colonial-style governor, in this case Ian Richardson playing Rex Hunt, who has the iconography of a very old-school imperial administrator. He is formal, restrained, and committed to his duty, even in the face of overwhelming odds. However, there is also, I think, a post-imperial perspective to An Ungentlemanly Act. It is in no way, shape or form a triumphalist film. Instead, it shows the kind of awkward reality of maintaining distant territories in a post-empire world, and glamorous the Falkland Islands are not. The film was shot on location in them, and as anyone who's been there or who will tell you anything about it, it's a pretty barren place. This is not one with lush jungles and palaces such as one would expect in the Raj. Indeed, my friend who went to the conflict said you couldn't even find a tree to have a wee behind. It was that barren and desolate. So there is a kind of gritty reality, I think, to An Ungentlemanly Act, which kind of sets it apart from what we would expect from a traditional empire film.
Most likely another of the Argentines' bizarre ways of staking their claims. They even fly officers' wives out here to have babies.
Dare we even complain when their military run our only air link? They're bound to know our Buenos Aires military attaché had to pay his own bloody fare when he came to recce here last month.
Well, the 2-inch mortar should hold up any sub's landing party for a while.
It's still got a crack in it, Mike.
If anyone lands from this sub, the best I can do is invite them in for a short, sharp lecture and a glass of sherry.
The FO at my briefing, bless 'em, were confident this was a niggling phase.
How many in our submarine reaction party?
5.
There is an undeniable humour and charm to An Ungentlemanly Act, and it comes through a very British way of dealing with imminent danger, which is to say, kind of carry on in a blissful ignorance. And this is juxtaposed with the military preparations which are going on, which are all professional and yet embedded with a kind of realism. The major in charge, Mike Norman, played by the brilliant Bob Peck, is more than aware of the chances of the Marines being able to put up a good fight. Indeed, one of his ideas is to attack the Argentinians and then take to the hills and fight a kind of guerrilla war. However, you get the impression also that he's absolutely completely aware of the fact that utter annihilation may just be round the corner. And whilst he is prepping everybody for the inevitable showdown, Governor Hunt's wife, Mavis, goes about the really important things, making sure everyone's got a cup of tea, inviting some of the islanders over to take some cuttings from her garden, and genuinely ensuring that all of the boys, aka the Marines, are going to be able to have food and snacks for when the attack comes. And you begin to get, I wouldn't say a rather quaint version of Empire, but it certainly has a dated quality to it, and I think that is entirely deliberate. No one is hysterical. The dialogue is quite formal and lacking in any kind of histrionics. Indeed, there is a kind of resignation that they've pretty much just been abandoned to themselves and will have to make the best out of a fairly crap situation. And you get the sense that this really is the last dying embers of empire. There is a quaintness to Government House. As I said, there are pictures of the Queen everywhere and crockery neatly organised. And there is a real sense that the islanders understand the hierarchy of how things work. The governor and his wife are the de facto heads of state, and the Marines, despite there only being a few of them, are ingrained in the local community and seem genuinely appreciated and liked. And it all has a rather quiet stoicism about the whole thing. And these were qualities that were beginning to disappear in the 1990s. We were really moving into a new age. I certainly sensed that at the time, especially around 95, 96, with the explosion in British culture that seemed to reinvent what Britain was and almost give it a new sense of pride in itself that was very different from the Britain that had gone before. And when watching An Ungentlemanly Act, you do feel like you are being transported back in time to a degree. And of course, 1982 now is a long time ago. It's almost 50 years, in fact, half a century. And although we think of it as being, I suppose, relatively recent history, it still depicts a time that was very different. And I think there is a unique British humour to the exchanges and the dialogues. I don't think you could write some of the speeches that we hear in the film today. I think they would cause a great deal of offence, not that I think they are offensive. And as I understand, a lot of what is said in the film was taken verbatim from eyewitnesses' accounts. And this is a world in which the hierarchies are clear to see. The governor and his wife act like a de facto king and queen. There is the public educated officers, and then the working class rank and file who have the utmost respect for the military and their commanders. And there is a genuine sense that this military machine functions on mutual respect and, above all, discipline and dedication to the cause.
Now, I haven't bullshitted you about the odds. We'll fight until the governor throws in the towel or until we're overrun, which probably means dying. I want you to face that death. Think about what it means now, and when the firing starts, forget it. You are the green berries, the royals. That means you will knock 7 shades of excrement out of them before you go down. Now, don't get angry with whoever dropped you in the smelly stuff. You're in fathoms of it, and it's too late. Get angry with the arrogant bastards who are planning to waltz in here thinking you'll just take it up the bum. Now, Gary's men know this place and like it. And I'm sure some of them have got local girls on their minds. Maybe even sheep. But half of us haven't even had time to find the pub. Tonight, when the time comes, we're fighting for ourselves. For what Royal stands for. For one another. Any questions? All right, lads. Let's go for it.
Thanks, boss.
Well done, Mike. Couldn't have done it myself.
There's 70 men here, right? And they're going to die. And there's fuck all you and I can do about it.
When the fighting does eventually get underway, you have to really hand it to the filmmaking skills of Stuart Urban because you really do get a sense of the intensity of the conflict. It begins at night, and seeing the tracer bullets fly down off the mountains into the government building are genuinely quite terrifying. This was a battle fought with relatively small numbers, and you get a sense almost right away that the British are going to be on the back foot. But what the film does, which is really an intelligent decision to make, is that unlike a lot of war films, it doesn't demonize the enemy. The Argentine forces are portrayed as professional, disciplined, and respectful toward their opponents, and there are moments of mutual curiosity between officers on both sides. And at one stage, 2 Argentine soldiers are wounded in the garden, and the British are doing everything they can to get them some kind of medical help. And it comes back to the theme of this film, that it is about professionalism and chivalry. And it reminds me of the other Empire classic film, Zulu, in that respect. It is about people doing their duty, people doing the jobs they have been trained to do. And it helps add a kind of moral complexity to the film, because you don't feel like you are watching simple propaganda. It is a far more sophisticated film than just that. And there is a kind of paradox to this story, because this is the opening battle of the Falklands War, and Britain ultimately loses it. It would go on to eventually win the conflict. Within weeks of this opening battle, a naval task force was sent down to the Falkland Islands, and the conflict quickly became a full-scale war, with the British eventually retaking the islands. And ultimately, it's a film that has the against all odds narrative, where, yes, the battle hasn't been won, but we know who wins the war, and the fact that they were so heroic in what they were trying to do kind of, in many respects, glosses over the actual defeat. And there is a kind of inevitability when Governor Rex Hunt and his wife leave, with Rex in his full ceremonial uniform, that despite losing this skirmish, it is British values that are going to prevail. Let's not forget that these Argentine soldiers were representative of a pretty despicable regime, and the Marines and the governor have a head held high attitude. And there is a brilliant scene where the Argentines are putting up a flag, and they bring down the Union Jack and try to put their own flag up, and it flies off with a huge gust of wind, and all the British people in present all start laughing and cheering. And it's incredibly petty almost to be so happy about this, but it is part of the film's enduring charm. There is a kind of Dad's Army quality to it. The absolute abject failure of the volunteer defence forces to make any kind of fight. There isn't a speech admonishing them for deciding they don't want to take part, and they're just told to calmly put their guns in the middle of the room and sit in the corner, and their commander slightly meekly tells them that they've already done that. And I've watched it several times over the years, and I do think it really has an important part in Empire film history. It's very much a bridge between the old imperial cinema and modern war storytelling. It's an incredibly sophisticated work too. It understands that just because you have an enemy, quote unquote, it doesn't mean they're a bunch of absolute animals. Indeed, the film goes out of its way to show the chivalry and the gentlemanly behaviour of the Argentine commanders. And it really benefits from being shot on location. The location adds so much to the story because you do look at it and think, God, did we really fight over this rock? But what it does show is that the people there were independent, considered themselves incredibly patriotic, and were ultimately British citizens who did not want to be forced to live under a military dictatorship. And it made me nostalgic, not for the British Empire, because obviously I wouldn't know what it was like, but for when the BBC made content like this. It's a film that didn't need a huge budget because the story it tells was relatively quite small, but the production values are absolutely top notch. It's impeccably acted. Of course, Ian Richardson and Bob Peck bring a real gravitas to it, but I would say it would be virtually impossible to imagine this getting made in today's climate, and that is a great shame because the BBC is capable of so much better. But on the whole, I can't recommend An Ungentlemanly Act enough. It does come on and off streaming services occasionally, and if you do know where to look on the slightly less legal side of the internet, you can pick up a pretty decent 1080p rip. I believe it came out on DVD years ago, and I do have that, and the quality was absolutely atrocious, so be warned. I think it is really overdue a better release, and I know it was remastered a few years ago from the original film elements, so hopefully perhaps a Blu-ray might be in the works sometime down the line. So overall, An Ungentlemanly Act, a really fine British Empire film, a good war film, and also a surprisingly amusing film at times. I cannot recommend it enough. So that's going to be it for this season of the 24 Frames cast. I will be returning with season 3 on April the 5th. There may be a couple of bonus episodes between now and then. I've got some writing to do and quite a bit of it as well, so I'm going to give myself a little bit of a breather from doing main episodes. So yeah, many thanks for listening. I'm really enjoying getting back into the swing of all this, so many thanks. Bye.